Palingenesis by Simon Harewood. Book 3, Heart of the Sear. Chapter 22, Palingenesis. Suntide. Longer, brighter days roll round, and the cold, the dismal tides are forgotten in the joy of their arrival. All the war-torn lands emerge from the ravages of violence done upon them, like the newborn buds of Genesis, eager for growth, for restoration. Yet the cataclysmic devastation of the swarm, the scars left by Lord Malik's bid for dominion, would take generations to repair. In some places, my role had changed forever. The marshland realm of Tiralon was no more. The kingdom of Lysan had disappeared. Ligerium was a crippled shadow of what it had been. Still, there were miracles to appreciate. Survivors from isolated hamlets, farms untouched, and people spared by chance or device. Nemona, Vernacum, and Gades were abandoned by the few overlords installed by Hekan and Malik, and what remained of the people there would claim the lands about them as their own once more. Leaderless and without defense, they were eager to be associated with the victorious alliance now centered in Belruth. By the end of the season, their chosen representatives made overtures to Byrand and Ranald, begging for protection and security. Trax Isle surrendered willingly, the destruction of their meager fighting force, and the loss of their vessels doing much to persuade any who considered resisting. Thousands of Ligerians were freed to return to their homeland. For his services rendered, and on Rune's recommendation, Johin was appointed overlord in Kilvest, with the understanding that only legitimate trade would be conducted in his realm forthwith. The young man was overwhelmed, but confident, at the ceremony of his investment, promising to do the will of the informal council there assembled. Belruth itself was filled with the Viron refugees from the towers. They were everywhere, engaged in repairing the village huts, cleaning out the city dwellings, tending the fields. Laughter filled the streets again, youth and vigor displayed itself everywhere. And Lund walked among them, accompanied by Ceridwen, rejoicing with them all at this unexpected homecoming, this happy end to their long exile. On the first day of high suntide, the evening of the festival, there was another ceremony to be conducted in the Belruth Temple. The place itself had been transformed. All the tiered seats had been removed, along with the shattered dais. The floor had been leveled, changing the shape to that of a large hall, now simply called the Hall of Remembrance. Vadran craftsmen had rearranged many of the crystals in the walls, adding others brought up from the hand, as well as mosaics of stained glass, to depict the final chapters of the struggle that had played out in their time. The largest was placed in the middle, a scene of the ferocious battle in front of Belruth. The lofty eye twisted and turned around the flying Sear, brandishing the brilliant judgment blade, while Imran made his daring assault below among the striving multitudes. Around this detailed rendition, several others were constructed, ranging from the sieges of Heron Inrath and Aran Rock to the dark pools at Frane's Point, where 4 tiny figures were pouring greenish powder into the water. Rune's battle with the dragon made up the last of these, with the arrow that had aided him streaking in from Gareth's bow. In a corner niche was placed a single blue flame, above which could be seen a remnant of the former statue of the winged man, a fragment of the face. There was also one more picture to add to the existing mosaics in the temple, the Reconciliation. At Gareth's urging, the drama of Imran and Pelia was concluded by the scene he had witnessed in the Portal Vale. Though he would not divulge any details, and had to appeal to Janos for its eventual validation. Now the two immortals could be seen returning to their garden through an arched gateway on which a single rose was budding. A similar arch had been placed in the center of the hall, though this one was not made to last. Fashioned from green boughs laced together with delicate twine, the gateway was decorated with flowers of varied hue and fragrance. Already the guests were in place, filling every available space round the arch, standing in hushed pockets of excitement. When Rune entered, he groaned inwardly at the sight of so many, though it would have been impossible to keep them out. This was a ceremony that required witnesses and celebration, and the day did not belong to him alone. Lund walked in, glancing nervously at him. Rune refrained from laughing with an effort. That the likes of them, who had faced enemies powerful beyond measure, would hesitate at the sight of a crowd assembled to wish them well. He smiled slightly instead, and motioned towards the arch with his hand. Together they walked down the cleared walkway. The two were similarly attired in the dark surcoats adorned by an amber eye that spoke of the towers and ancient Belruth. A blade rode on the left hip. They halted on both sides of the arch and turned to face the doorway. Almost immediately, Haldred and Serdwin entered. A ripple went through the crowd as necks craned to get a better look. Gareth had a clear view where he stood with Byrand and Ranald, a few paces away from the arch. How bright they seemed, the two women coming towards them, how full of life and vigor. Haldred wore a simple gown of sky blue, her dark hair tied behind in a golden clasp, with a few ringlets falling about her face. Serdwin looked strangely older now, more mature than when he had first seen her. The deep red gown she wore swept the floor round her feet. As she approached, he could make out one feature contributing to this notable change. Her hair was carefully plaited behind, with a thin chain circling her brow like a coronet. The women joined their respective partners. All was ready for the ceremony to commence, an opportunity to express their mutual love and exchange vows of fidelity. Byrand stepped forward to stand beside Haldred. His voice rang out in the domed silence.
"Who has brought this woman to this place?"
"I have done so,"
replied Rune.
"Will you hear our vows?"
Byrand hesitated. For a moment he saw what might have been, what should have been. The silhouette of Aethera, his daughter, standing here with her betrothed, the blush of youthful expectation on her face. He would have been the one to hear their vows that day, to send them on their way of happiness and fulfillment. Now it was another that stood here in her stead, and Aethera was dead. Tears came unbidden to his eyes, and he could not speak for fear of betraying his emotions. He looked away, the silence lengthening. One or two people stirred restlessly. Byrand's stare fixed itself on a face in the front row, that of his grandson. In a moment the heaviness and regret lifted. Aethera had not lived in vain.
"I will,"
he said aloud. Rune had noticed something of the struggle in the man's eyes. He had also witnessed the brief exchange between Gareth and the Count. It was with relief that he led Haldred to stand with him under the arch. The vows they had rehearsed before were now spoken out loud, and Rune felt something of the strangeness Byrand had experienced. No one in the crowd noticed anything peculiar. To them it was a ceremony like the many they had seen before it. Some even appeared a little distracted. Behind Gareth, Anik and Bior were whispering to each other, loud enough for him to overhear. He cleared his throat in annoyance, but they simply ignored him. Everything was under discussion, from the bride's attire to the new mosaics on the walls. When Haldred completed her vow, Byrand had them step forward hand in hand to be recognized by the company. Now there were loud cheers and shouts of acclaim from the assembly, rising up to echo in the vaulted ceiling. Rune embraced his wife, kissing her fleetingly. She clung to him and whispered in his ear,
I have to warn you, I have been married before.
So have I,
he replied.
though I never got as far as the ceremony.
They joined Byrand in the crowd of onlookers and waited for the noise to abate. As soon as the silence engulfed all, apart from the two commentators behind Gareth, it was Rune's turn to step forward once more towards the arch. He took up his position beside Sirid when news smiled at him. She and Lund had asked him specifically to perform the ceremony for them. There had been no such things in Grail, and it was a novel experience for some in the crowd, as well as the two present participants. As Rune called for their purpose and agreed to acknowledge their respective vows, Anik whispered to Bior,
The new husband straightway becomes the keeper of the vow. This must be a first.
They chuckled quietly to themselves. Gareth had had enough. He turned around and whispered loudly,
Will Nightingale and Sparrow please hold their peace? I'm sure they will soon get their turn to exchange vows with someone.
The two men stared at him in such evident astonishment that he knew there would be no reply forthcoming. He would have to take care in the days to come, though. They would certainly find a way to get even. There was a modest wedding feast in the king's hall, followed almost immediately with a conference to settle the affairs of the eastern kingdoms. Byrand opened the proceedings by once again offering the crown of Viran to Rune, who politely but firmly declined. All present knew that a single kingdom was against the final wishes of Kael, though no one begrudged Rune the claim on the throne he held by right of birth. Both Hunnick and Bior were very relieved that Rune refused it, whether out of respect to the ancient's wishes or personal reasons. Now the conversation turned to alternative means of governing the realms in the east. Rune repeated his suggestions of before, and at the urging of Byrand and the assurance that it would only be for a limited time, the four captains accepted. There were other considerations, however, for the southern cities were almost entirely depopulated, even if the structures of at least Store and Gurdell were mostly intact. Belruth, on the other hand, housed all 6,500 of the returned slaves. Byrand addressed this concern directly. There are many empty homes in Gurdell, Ingerval, Store, and in Gilreth this day. Many mothers and fathers are weep for their fallen sons. I noticed the large numbers of children among the exiles. We will try to meet the needs of all. Each city should receive a quota of volunteers to build it up again. New families will be created to replace the old ones that are no more. Viran will live again, the way it was intended to be. There was agreement all round. The Count of Gilreth continued. There will be no king and no single overlord. Each governor of the 5 regions will carry the title of Count, and will be equal in all matters. I propose we meet regularly in this fashion, to revise the laws and customs of our lands. I further propose that we investigate the possibility of reviving the initiate's course. He raised a hand as the surprised eyes turned on him. I know there is no longer a seer in the towers, but that does not mean we have no more need of visions of purpose. Now that the great struggle of our age is concluded, even more so, for the purposes of peace quite often outstrip those of war in magnitude and lasting significance, though the latter of necessity had to pave the way. I am assured of the assistance of the Vadran in this matter." Gareth listened with little interest. The Nuria that he had disliked so much was no more. Its people had passed into the shadows. Only Melvor had formed part of that world, and to a lesser degree Byrand and Garrelane, but they were all so different in essence and attitude as to make them strangers to the men they were before. Where was his place in all this commotion and rearrangement of lives? What would Rune do? Already he knew the man was not comfortable in his former home. There were too many memories, too much hurt with which to contend. As the conversations ebbed and flowed, he leaned over to whisper in his father's ear.
Where will you go?
Who says I will leave this place?
The boy shrugged.
I know you want to.
Rune fell silent for a while, pretending to listen to the others talking. Then he turned his head sideways to reply.
There is much empty land to the south. I will find a place to pursue these purposes of peace.
Gareth nodded and sat back in his chair, but Rune beckoned him closer again.
You are not angry with me?
Angry?
The boy looked puzzled.
I would have married your mother in this very place, all those cycles ago. This must be difficult for you. I'm not trying to replace her. There is no way to erase her from my heart.
I know.
You do?
Yes. In all the cycles you were in exile. You never married another, even though you believed you hated her.
Rune smiled at him.
Haldred is very different to Aethera, but I will not compare them. One is your mother, the other, well, she is nothing to you.
She is something to me. She loves you, and for that alone I would love her too.
Silence had fallen round the table as the discussions were terminated, and for a brief moment Gareth feared that his last comment had been overheard. If the others had been listening to him, they gave no sign. The noon watch was spent by the time they adjourned, and he was hungry again. Brennick had been banished from Rune's quarters to make room for Haldred, though the barracks was hardly a fitting place for newlyweds. The boy was fully recovered by now, and did not mind being crammed, together with Rin, into the small room Gareth shared once more with Den. The boys from Grail had slept on the floor all their lives, and still thought of the simple soldier beds as extravagant and luxurious. The room did not seem particularly crowded to them. Besides, they spent the vast majority of their time outside, clambering about the towers and fortifications of the castle. Rune and Haldred brought him to a private room that had once belonged to the former king. Here Arid, Maris, and Cura awaited them, and a meal had been prepared. There was much excitement as they entered, with Cura embracing her mistress almost in tears. Arid eyed the newcomers a little nervously, and Maris stood smiling with his back against the wall, still pale from his recent ordeal. Before they were invited to sit down at the small table, there was quite a different request from the two young people. Cura spoke for both of them.
We have a favor to beg of you, mistress. Of you both.
She glanced shyly at Rune. Haldred took hold of her hand.
Anything at all.
Maris stepped forward from the wall and spoke directly to Rune.
Would you hear our vows?
Rune did not have to pretend surprise. He glanced at Gareth as if to say, "Do I look like a priest today?" And the boy bit his lip not to laugh. "Of course," the man managed. Even though the ceremony with its prepared lines seemed a little formal, the three spectators enjoyed Rune's half-hearted attempt at grandeur, and the obvious rapture of the couple at pronouncing publicly the words oft recited in secret. Arid clapped his hands when they had concluded with a kiss, and ran forward to embrace them both.
"This is a noonday meal with a hidden motive, then?"
said Haldred once they turned to the table.
Yes.
Replied Cura.
More than one, in fact. We were not allowed at the wedding feast with so many important people about. Now, at least, we get to celebrate with you.
Soon the conversation turned more serious, and the party discussed their plans for the future. Haldred was adamant from the outset that she did not regard Cura or Maris as servants any longer, and indeed never had, though both of them had felt the obligation. Notably Maris, with his promise to her brother certainly discharged after the many brave deeds on her behalf, was free to settle anywhere he desired with his new wife. Both young people protested vehemently and begged to be allowed to remain in her service. Hearing their tearful pleas, she relented, though there could be no promise of luxury or wealth in her future in which they could share. Rune smiled at this, looking sideways at Gareth.
The powers that be have offered me any estate or dukedom I may desire, and the same again for Gareth and yourself. The three of you,
He pointed to Arid, Maris, and Cura,
will receive grants also. Whether you will take it in coin or lands, that will be up to you. All we have to decide is where to go.
I have no desire to see Ligerium again.
said Haldred.
It speaks now only of my old life. It is filled with violence and fearful shadows.
I will not remain here in the north,
said Rune.
for much the same reasons you have mentioned.
He grew pensive.
I know a place where I could learn to live again.
Gareth looked up sharply.
I know where that is.
He said. Two days later, the Aranite host finally commenced their long march back to their homeland. Those who were wounded during the Battle of Belruth were mostly recovered, with a few more serious cases traveling in covered carts. Ranald and Evrain with a large contingent marched for Ingerval in the coast, where the Aranite fleet was at anchor. Hanek picked a number of Inrathians to crew their vessels that had by this time been brought up at his instruction. The women and young children of Heron Inrath still resided in the cauldron, and had to be brought back either to Viron, the empty lands of Ligerium, or the Witch Isle itself. The morning before their departure, Gareth received an unexpected visitor. The slight form of a Vadran man appeared in the doorway as he was about to leave for the dining hall. His companions had gone on ahead, leaving him alone in the room. He recognized the figure at once.
Lord Sith.
No, no.
The small man raised his hand, smiling.
No master or lord. Sith will do.
Gareth retreated back into the room, allowing him to enter.
I have come to make a request of you.
Said the Vadran.
That is the final wish of Vir, my master. It was his desire that you should dwell in the towers, at least for 2 or 3 seasons every cycle. He bequeaths to you his books, his rooms, and the crystal chamber, asking simply that you will not let these fall into disrepair and dust. You may choose your own successor when the time comes.
He smiled again.
Many cycles hence, to pass on the legacy. I will remain there always, to serve, to advise, to keep up the place for you, and a tribute from the hand will provide generously for your living.
He paused and looked at the boy with great solemnity.
Will you honor this request?
Gareth stared at him, speechless. The towers would be his. All those books to read and study. How could he dream of turning that down? He stammered a response.
I would, of course, but I cannot have you serve me.
A friend, then?
Said Sith, holding out his hand. Gareth merely nodded, taking hold of the outstretched hand.
I will look for your coming in rhyme song. I know there are many things for you to do during Suntide.
The flotilla set sail early to catch the morning tide. Rune and Haldred traveled with Hanek on board the Inrathian vessels. Gareth and his new brother, together with Maris and Cura, decided to go with Evrain and the king. For the fisherman captain from Kiel, it was a joyful voyage. The fighting was over, the military duties in the past, the strife and suspicion between Aaron and Viron. At home waited his family, his fishing boat, the serenity of life on the Aaron shore. Keeping them company with no end of wisdom and quaint stories was Lur, none the worse for wear after the long marches and pitched battle. Arid took a liking to him almost immediately, and the two shared their watches and the pleasant gossip soon apparent among the ship's company. The weather remained fair and they made good progress. With his companions occupied with each other and Arid learning seamanship from Lur, Gareth spent his time with Evrain and the king. Ranald had aged during the last few seasons, though his youthful confidence and vigor had not abated. He seemed more pensive now, and there were moments of silent reflection when he simply stared out to sea without saying a word. Gareth caught him in one of these moods on the afternoon of the 5th day of their voyage. Ranald stood in the bow, gazing towards the western horizon, hiding his homeland. The boy did not wish to disturb him, and took up a position a few paces away. Thus they remained for a while, until Ranald noticed him. The king beckoned Gareth towards him, smiling.
"Well, young man, have you considered where you will go now that you have saved everyone?"
Gareth regarded him quizzically, unsure whether he was jesting or not.
Saved everyone?
Ranald nodded, pursing his lips.
"I have spoken to a large variety of people since our epic battle. Your name has come up many times. If it had not been for you, Gilreth and the Sear would have faced Malik's force by themselves. There would have been no Kael to help them, and without him no Aaron, no Inrathians, no Vadran, and no Lund's band."
Gareth shrugged and shook his head.
Everyone helped. I did very little in the end.
"Like the arrow from your little bow."
The boy laughed.
You flatter me. Mostly, I was just scared.
Ranald joined in the laughter.
"There were many an occasion on that chaotic field when I was just scared also. I still marvel that we are here yet, alive and talking. It is nothing short of a miracle."
He grew serious again.
"One has to believe in such things now."
At the parting of the two fleets, Gareth and the others were transferred to Hunnick's vessel. Evrain came to say farewell just before the boat was lowered and the passengers rowed across to the waiting Viron ship. With him was Lur, smiling broadly, but with a tear in one eye.
"I hope to see ye again soon,"
he said.
"There'll be another race to the rock shortly, and how will we manage without ye?"
Evrain embraced him and spoke into his hair.
"I will bring the watermen and Lur to see you in hunting. It will be good preparation for the race."
Gareth shook his head at the men.
Would you really want me to sail with you again?
Lur looked shocked.
"But, of course. Did ye not change our luck the last time?"
"Would you like that?"
asked Evrain. Gareth nodded, smiling.
I would love to.
"We'll take you back with us then in hunting. Perhaps you can persuade the others to visit us too. I'm sure they would want to see what Peel looks like."
"Well, we shall meet again in Repeat at the Rock,"
interjected Ranald.
"Farewell until then."
Gareth and the others stepped into the boat. He was happy, even at this parting, for there was the promise of a reunion in the near future. None of his friends would disappear from his life. Apart from the meeting to commemorate the Battle of Belruth every cycle in Greenswell, and the time he would spend in the towers during Rhymesong, there was now also a visit to Aaron to consider. He would divide his time between the cities and the towers, visiting Evrain. Everywhere would be his home, and nowhere in particular. Perhaps he could make time to visit Shirvan and the Hand. For Ranald, there was much to do upon his homecoming. A few of the former Amul decided to stay on in Arran. Many requested resettlement in the Giri Federation. They had been forced into the Gudrid Empire and had no desire to remain the slaves of the Shadow's successor. With the great loss of life that cycle, they would be welcomed by their neighbors. Trade agreements and treaties of friendship were discussed and implemented. The troubled North was visited again and grievances of the Moundsmen addressed. Then there was the serious business of finding someone to share the royal palace with him in Linnold. Evrain and Lur went back to their nets with relief and joy. There would be no more duties to perform for the king, no more service in the military to keep out the invaders from the east. Mirael greeted the travelers with the news of an unexpected addition to the family, to the rejoicing of all, and within the appointed time, Evrain once more embraced a son of his own. Hunnic and Beor kept their commitments to the folk of Kael's former realm. Most of these were taken to new homes in Aruis and Varus on the coast of Ligurium, but about 200 requested to return to Heron Inrath, to serve the new lord there, and rebuild the homes they had loved. The people of Viron migrated to new homes in the cities of their choice, bringing life once more to Ingerval, Gerdel, and Stor. Many of the returned slaves mingled with the survivors and settlers from Gilreth to form new communities where once again there would be music and laughter, song and mirth in abundance. The lords of these realms were respected and honored not only for their heroism during the long struggle, but their true concern for the welfare of their subjects. Everywhere, the old ways were restored and encouraged, and before the end of Rhymesong, there was an initiate's course in the wilder parts of each region. It is said the new Count of Belruth went to the southern forests that same cycle, past the ruins of Nunmerig in the marshes, past the sinking, abandoned hulk of the fortress Zirok, down the winding road to Grail. It is also said that many of his companions wept at the sight of it, the broken wall, the arena with its tall iron gates unhinged. But the Count would not shed a tear, even now that he had acquired the skill. He passed through the running trails with a stern look, keeping his feelings in check. It was only when they reached the farm clearing in the extreme south, and he had made his way to the tanning yard, that wistful memories overpowered him, and he sagged to his knees and wept. There they gathered round him, thousands of the forgotten, the forsaken, the children of despair, to express now at last the grief that had been forever buried beneath their terror, and the simple gratitude for an unlooked-for deliverance. There was talk also of a traveling physician, moving from town to town around the inland sea. His silver hair was long but neatly tied. People welcomed him for his remedies, his good humor, and the tales he told round the fireside at night, even if he sometimes said a thing or two that was hard to understand. And he had an uncommon liking for swamp rats. The cycle wound to a close like all those before it, and yet a change had come over all of Myrol. For there was no return of the Wanderer at the end of leasing before the onset of Genesis, to drown the world in 11 days of darkness. Pelia did not approach her ever-frowning Lord Imran to be refused and rejected again. There was no humiliating departure, no slow return of delight. Amazement soon gave way to rejoicing as people all over watched the clear sky, the prevailing light of the sun, day after day, till in the midst of the former darkening, the miracle finally was owned. A new festival was born, a new season had to be named. Different regions would call the short season by different appellations, but in the west it soon became known as Palingenesis, for the exiled gods had returned, and the world was at peace. The mid-Hyacintide sun sparkled in 1,000 facets of gold on the water of what men formerly called the Witch Sea. A gentle breeze bowed the dune grass on the white shore, played among the upturned boats on the beach, and ruffled the hair of boys fishing off the newly constructed pier. 2 of these were Viron, fair and bronzed now by the sun. One wore a scar upon his cheek. The old stone fortress sprawled in disrepair on the high ground, its gates unhinged, its walls unmanned. 2 women walked together along the outer wall. The older of the 2 hugged herself in joyful contentment. Here was the place her dream had gained substance at last, and all the dark wanderings that had led her to this day were now forgotten in the brightness of the sky, the floating clouds like sails upon the sea, the laughter of her little boy among the children on the pier. The footpath meandered beyond the village with its restored cottages, the villagers at work in the orchards and fields. A small herd of cattle dozed in the shade of a copse, away towards the hilly interior. Birds called from the thickets closing in on the meadow. The way became narrow and overgrown. A man strolled purposefully through the encroaching undergrowth, making his way along without haste. His thoughts wandered with the path to places distant and times beyond the present. In his heart there was a sense of wonder at all these episodes of peril and the persistent folly that would have undone him time and again. It was not cunning, nor skill, nor courage and perseverance that had brought him to this place, free from the dark dream that had driven him for so long. He had not earned the second chance, neither had he deserved the destruction of his first. He entered the deep shade under the canopy of green. A coolness settled about him, touching his brow, his hands, his face. The sound of rushing water rose up from behind an outcrop ahead. Silver water cascaded over the moss-covered stones. In the song of its everlasting passage, the shadows of recent times no longer had a place. Promises of peace, the rising worth of suntide in a world free from the taint of spite and jealous hatred, welled up in a crystal tide to slake the long thirst of those who had till recently known little but despair. The boy sat with upturned face, his eyes closed, as if listening intently to this miraculous music. He propped himself up with outstretched arms, his hands buried among the yellow leaves. Rune hesitated at the sight of him, remembering suddenly the last meeting in this place. How many dark days had intervened between then and now? What terrible deeds were done? What cruel betrayal had followed their uneasy peace? And all the time that child had known the truth. The anguish of it gripped him, and tears rolled unbidden from his eyes to drip on the bed of dried leaves about his feet. As if he had heard it, the boy turned his head suddenly and looked at him. For a moment Gareth appeared startled, but quickly smiled when he recognized his father. The smile faded.
Why are you weeping?
Rune shook his head slowly. Was there no reason to weep? If not from regret, then from the overwhelming joy of a charmed life, an unimaginable outcome, a treasure lost and gained back 100-fold. Gareth stood up from his perch beside the stream. He turned to face the man and took a step closer.
Is this not the place you were looking for?
Rune saw again the darkness of the cell beneath Lakeside. He saw the deck of several ships beneath his feet, the fiery monsters above the field of death before Belruth, the countless weary miles he had traversed to find this haven.
No, it was you I was looking for.
Gareth regarded him in puzzlement. Was the man making fun of him? No. There was no smile of mischief on his face. He caught the meaning suddenly, and the warmth of it spread through him, reddening his face.
It is time to come home then,
he stammered, pretending without success that he had misunderstood. Rune brushed a hand fleetingly across his eyes, then reached with the other around the boy's shoulders, pulling him playfully up the pathway back to Fur.
Yes, it is time.